Dave, if you could just give us a very quick, very quick, very quick, no stories, resume of what you've said to us, what you feel the main points are of what you've said to us over the last 2 days. You've got, how long has he got, Tina, do you reckon? Just to refresh our memories, and then out of that, the opportunity will be there for you to comment or pick up questions or issues.
You find it all in Nehemiah.
Can we try just a smidgen more? Just a wee bit more.
Right, for those of you that are still working out whether it's breakfast time or you're finished or what, essentially started off by looking at the whole point that the condition of everything else is sharing Father's heart, and that means loving the city and rediscovering vision through burden and prayer. We went on to leadership, making an honest estimation of ourselves and what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, where our ministry begins, where it stops, and then looking for leadership where maybe we haven't looked for it before, and recognizing that God raises up leadership in a different way to the world does, that man looks at outward appearances, but God looks at the heart. Then the whole issue of workers and warriors, that if you spend all your time just getting stuck in the work, then you're very vulnerable, and the enemy certainly does give us a hard time, particularly in the inner city, because it's his stronghold, and he doesn't like us being there. And so the importance of, if you like, having a sword in one hand and a shovel in the other, to learn to be workers and to be warriors. And then to do something about it, that we've got to be doers of the word. Faith's got to work out in action. But the biggest problem is that the longer in the tooth we get, the more experience we get, the more yes buts we get. And ultimately, through everything that we do, sort of coming around full circle, that I believe that the great challenge to us, because you can get so cynical and so hardened through your experiences, to keep falling in love with Jesus again and again and again.
Thank you, Dave. Now, Tina, you've been sitting here very quietly, listening to Dave speak, and I guess you've heard him speak umpteen times. You probably heard most of the stories several times over. You probably got a number of stories you could tell yourself. I mean, I haven't warned Tina about this. She doesn't know what's going to be sprung on her, so forgive me. Is there anything, you've been listening to Dave over the last few days. Is there anything you'd want to say in light of what he's been saying? Are there any points that really stick in your mind that you'd want to underline or reinforce from your experience of working along with Dave in the sort of areas of ministry that he's coming from, he's been sharing with us?
I think probably the main point is the bit about looking for leadership in people that you least expect it. Because we've come across so many people, and when we first met them, you do tend to become a bit cynical, and you think, oh, God, what are you doing? What can we do with all these people, and where are we going? And then you sort of suddenly see them change in such a radical way. And, it's just, you just really feel blessed that you've been part of it, and able to see them. And I think something that's taught us is not to write anybody off. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, it's over to you. Is there anything you'd like to ask or comment on? Yeah, at the back, Mick.
A couple of questions really, but basically revolving both around children. We're talking about working with street kids. Are you still working with street kids? And if so, is it you or is it other people in the church? And what do you do with your own kids and with other fellowship kids? I mean, in many churches, kids are perceived as a problem. Are they a problem to you in your fellowship setup? And if not, why not?
You got that in 2 minutes.
I was going to say, can we have another session?
I reckon if Dave answers the first half and Tina the second half, I think that would be fair.
Yeah, I've actually written a lot on working with street kids, so if you ever want to, I can sort of let you have the pack. Yeah, I mean, we worked with street kids from day one, and in the early days we used to have them in our house because there was nowhere else, and they used to pile in our cellar, and we used to have 30 to 40 street kids in our basement. In more recent times, we've experimented in different ways. I've tended to move over from that because my own lads came into their teens, and at that point I opted out of youth work because there's nothing worse than the old fella being involved when you're part of the young people. So I stood back at that time. Found it very, very hard to do, actually, because I've been working with young people of different sorts for 25 years. But watched from a distance. Got back a little bit last year, because when we opened the cafe, then we opened it to the street kids on a Friday night, and got back in with them there. And I still keep contact, because I see the street kids on the street corners and talk to them, relate to them. A lot of them still come to our house if somebody's got a problem, particularly with drugs. We're known in the area as somebody you can get help from if you've got a drug problem. So we keep that kind of contact. Our young people, because I think the big difference, my observation is that we live in the area. Everybody lives in the area. So like our sons, I was watching the other day with Michael Callaghan. He's one of the big scallies of the area, and there's our Merv chatting to him outside our house, because they went to school together. They've grown up together. So our kids integrate. I think my observation of a lot of kids in churches is that they don't integrate because they don't live where the other kids live. And so they're two separate gangs with two separate territories. Our young people are the same young people as the ones on the streets. The only thing is they're known as part of the God Squad, or more nicknamed the Devil Dodgers around our area.
Okay, Tina, do you want to add to that at all?
Really, just to say the same thing. When we were in Everton, a church in Everton, it was a slightly different situation. We found that the Christian kids didn't mix with the non-Christian ones. And even when the non-Christian ones became Christians, they sort of aspired and didn't mix. But in Anfield, I think, as David said, it's different because they've all gone to the same schools, they've all grown up together. It's very much a community. They all play on the same street corners. That they don't see themselves as different.
What about in the meetings themselves, though?
In the meetings themselves?
In the church meeting for kids?
Well, we take the very younger children out and sort of, we don't actually have a Sunday school, we run more of a creche with them, really. The older ones all stay in.
I think one of the things that, I just put this to you, is an interesting observation. I don't know why it's happened, I'll just tell you. We discover that our young people start wanting to stay in to the whole meeting at about the age of 10. And from the age of about 10 onwards, our young people stay in for the whole meeting.
I tell you what, why don't you describe to them a typical, not too many wild stories, very briefly again, describe to us a typical, what we would call a service or a meeting, because I think, you know, we bring our own understandings of that, and I think that would that be helpful? Yeah. Okay.
I start and David no doubt add to it. Well, normally we're supposed to start at 11:15, but I think true to form of most areas, people don't really start arriving till 11. There's always somebody there at 2:45, usually about half a dozen, you know, somebody playing a few, and so we start with quite a number of choruses, just fairly informally. People arrive, and we all sit round in a circle, and it's a very informal setting. So as people arrive, it tends to be a little bit disruptive, because even if we are in the middle of choruses, they'll still come in and say, oh, hiya, and hello, and, you know, this sort of thing. And then we'll have somebody leading, different to who's preaching. The person who's leading will no doubt get somebody to open in prayer. It'll be somebody that doesn't know they're going to open in prayer. They'll just pick on a couple of people. Tend to pick on one male and one female. I don't know whether I don't think that's really done deliberately. That's just become a bit of a habit, you know. And we'll open in prayer. Depends entirely then on the person who's leading, what form it takes. I mean, there's all the elements in it, you know, that we'd have. You know, there's prayer and possibly a bit of Bible reading, and then we have something that's quite important. We have what we call a share time. We don't have notices. We have a share time. So anything that's coming up in the week, people can be told about. But it also gives people an opportunity to say anything that's happened in their lives during the last week, or that they're going to happen in the following weeks. And if they want prayer, they'll ask for it then as well. And I think people like to feel important and involved, and in that, you know, sometimes they go on a little bit and you have to shut them up a bit. But, you know, we do have some people, you know. But it makes everybody feel involved and part of it. And then in between that, we've got a few people who'll come in even at that point quite late on again. You know, they'll sort of arrive for the service lasts about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and people will arrive within the first hour, really. And we've got And in that time, and then sometime during that point, usually towards the end, whoever's preaching will get up and preach. But then within that, you've got quite a number of colourful characters, and people will heckle who's speaking, because a lot of these people, you've got to understand, they've never been in a church before, so they don't know how to behave. They don't know that you sit in rows and keep quiet and don't say anything. And so if you say something that they don't like or they don't agree with, or even something that they do agree with, they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's right," and and go on and no, that's not right, or whatever, and it's very informal. And then, as I say, one character we've got, Gary. He's he was beaten up when he was in Risley Remand Centre, wasn't he? And he ended up having to have a tracheotomy and got brain damage because of it. And he comes along, and he'll be in and out to the loo all the time, and he'll announce to everybody where he's going, which is interesting because we haven't actually got a toilet in the building that we've got at the moment. And he comes out with a number of expletives. He's from a Catholic background, I think, so everything's Jesus, Mary, Joseph all the way through. And
I was telling in the middle of this, Tina, I was telling Fran, we always hold hands at the end of a meeting. And for the first few times that Gary came along...
I was getting to this.
Sorry.
What do you feel about this? Should Tina continue?
What I was going to say was... at the end, this is what David was going to say. We always close with the grace, and we all hold hands together. And first few times Gary came, he was between two women, and so it never mattered. Then on this one occasion, he happened to be standing next to Eddie, one of the other fellows from the fellowship. And if you'll excuse my language, he held hold of them and suddenly turned around. And Eddie reached to hold his hand. And Gary, as I say, we just had the closing prayer and the sort of, all the climax was saying the grace together. And Gary yells out, "F off, you queer." It's a fairly normal service, really.
Shall we, unless there's anything anything else you want to add? Do you want to add something?
No.
No?
Well, when we're all together, there's about 50, but an average Sunday morning meeting is 30, because I think one of the things I was trying to explain to folks at one of the meals earlier this week is that most of you will see Sunday as your focal point of worship. Whereas in Anfield, because we all live around each other, we're in and out of each other's houses all the time, and there is a more solid attendance at various groups that meet during the week than there is on a Sunday. And the life and the sharing goes on every day, and it'll be in the chip shop as well. And there's a whole load of things that we haven't the time to talk about really, but the way that we use language is exactly the same as on the streets. We don't have a set kind of religious language, and the way that you've heard me talk here is the way that we would share there. The result of that is that people talk about God, about Jesus, over a cup of coffee in the pub. One of our guys, Big Al's the captain of the local darts team, he reckons to put the opposition off by singing choruses, but it means that they're what I like to call naturally supernatural in the community, and that's very important.
That's great. Other questions? Brian at the back.
2 points really. I love going to Anfield mainly because Queen's Park Rangers are always completed. But especially, if you were to highlight one social difference between Anfield and inner London, what would that be?
The way we talk better than you. No, I think I'm not any expert at all, but it seems to me anyway that the big difference is that in inner London you are always within travelling distance of work. So although you may have high unemployment areas, there's always somewhere that you can go to. Whereas we live with the reality of life that, you know, there's a phrase in Anfield, well, in Liverpool, there's nothing down for you, because people who've gone to the job centres, not just week after week, but month after month, year after year, and get told, I'm sorry, son, there's nothing down for you. And we have something in Liverpool called the Tebbit Express that leaves Lime Street Station at 6:20 on a Monday morning down to London, and 1,500 people from Liverpool leave their families to work in London, because that's the only place that they can get work. So I think that is a very big difference.
Other questions? Elaine, and then Paul.
Can I ask Tina, how does it feel to be a breadwinner to support Dave's ministry?
Well, I don't really think about it too much, because it's something that sort of, I think God led us naturally into. Initially, I started back to work when the children were 4 and 5, which was just before we went to Anfield. And I never really intended to work full time. It's all the things that sort of God had a hand in, and I mean, and we never thought that David would come off a salary and I would be the breadwinner. It's just sort of all happened very gradually, and a number of decisions along the way that we took. And to me it's just quite natural, because it's never really been anything different. There was probably only 5 years when David ever really supported me, which is the opposite way around, the 5 years that I didn't work. So it's never been, because before that he was in university and I was working, so it was the same. I suppose I supported him then, so really for most of our married life, with the exception of 5 years. It's not.
Okay, Paul.
Yes, Dave, I remember reading an article you wrote some time ago about the house churches, and as part of that you said your vision for you, where you were, I don't know if you were in Everton or the other, but was that there would come to be an alliance of small Christian communities. Could you tell me how that has developed how's that now? What was the breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, that was really an article I wrote about something I've been interested in for a long time called the base community movement. And my observations in places like the Philippines and Latin America, where I visited, where you've seen these groups that have grown up from the local communities. And I was trying to explain in that article the difference between what was then the house church movement and this grassroots-based community movement. It's not really happened in Europe yet. Really. There are a lot of groups that call themselves based communities, but my observation on them is, if I'm being caricaturish, is that they're trendies who want to be where it's at and move in to city areas and to poor areas and say, here we are doing the business, and very political and all the rest of it. Whereas my observation on the based communities are people who have no choice but to be where they are, and who have worked it out in that situation. I often say that about Anfield. You see, our fellowship, I think we are one of the few couples in the fellowship who could choose to be somewhere else. Most of all don't have a choice. Now there is a network in Europe, and in fact Steve Maguire from our fellowship is one of the 2 English reps on the European based community movement, and we keep looking to that. We're the only evangelical group in it as well, because they're virtually all Roman Catholics. Although an observation, if I take a look ahead, is that what's happening in Latin America now is that many of the base community movements of Latin America have now become Pentecostal. That's the latest move in that, because they felt there was a restriction within the order that they could go so far and no further. I would like, my own personal vision still is the same. It's not there, but my own personal vision is to see the kind of thing that we're modelling in Anfield Road happening all over the country. I mean, it sounds almost like you're boasting in a way, and not trying to, because it's God that we give the glory to, but we've seen so many of our gang in a relatively short time come up into leadership, and we operate a leadership with, at the moment in Anfield, of 15 people who lead, teach and preach. When you bear in mind our average Sunday meeting is 30, that gives you an idea. And at the same time, we've sent out people all over the place. Hilary and Richard are in Toronto. John's just moved to Turin, ministering in Turin. Angie's was in China for 2 years. She's just going out to Poland now. Ian and Julie in Penmachno in Mid Wales, church planting, a very interesting joint English-Welsh speaking congregation. And those of you that know the culture will know that's a very unusual situation. Simon and Bridget we're going to see later on today, who are up in Cambridge working with the Anglican Church there. And Andy Dawson I talk about, and Debbie, who at the moment are in Oxford getting ready to come up into the city in the north again. And I don't believe that we're a special case. I just believe that, some of the things I've shared with you over these last few days, if we take on board and we take what God's saying seriously, it can happen anywhere. And my dream is for it to be that, because the biggest problem that we have is when somebody from our fellowship moves somewhere else. I mean, Graham from our fellowship, who was an ex-drug pusher and user and has become a wonderful evangelist, he found an awful hard time fitting in to another church because he was either a freak show or rejected because he was different from everybody else. And just to accept people as people in the way that Jesus does is not as easy as it sounds in a lot of the churches.
Okay, no, you can hang on to that. Ned next, and then Tim.
Can I ask David the same question, almost which was asked of Tina? What is it like as a man, not being the breadwinner? Did you struggle with that, or have you ever at the start?
I've not had a problem with not being the breadwinner outside. I've had a problem, if I'm being frank, in our own family, because there's a point where our sons got quite smart, and when they get to the age when they know everything and you're dead thick. It was Mark Twain who had said, at 14 I was irritated by the ignorance of my father. At 21 I was amazed at what he'd learned in 7 years. And when my lads wanted to be smart, they used to say, "You're using me mum's money," and that hurt. That's the only time I felt vulnerable on it at all. But I'm just being totally honest with you.
Just one other thing that I perhaps should have said before that I think's worked out quite well with me being the one that's earning the money is that in our community, since sort of we made the decision that I'd work and David would be unsalaried, now in our fellowship there is only one male that is in paid employment. There's a number of women, but only actually one man that receives a salary. And so it's not an unusual situation. And I think that in some cases, the fact that David's in the same situation has helped, because there have been people with problems that have been able to come, like Sue and Steve, who was just mentioned, another couple, she's a social worker, and he just doesn't do anything. He helps out in the fellowship. And so it's sort of opened, because there was a stigma. I mean, we've had people whose marriages have broken down because of it, because they couldn't cope with the woman working and the man not. And so it's helped people understand, I think.
Tim.
Yeah, sort of follow-on question from that, really. You talk about all the street kids using your home and things, presumably at night as much as the daytime, probably more. How did you cope with the family, particularly growing up, say the boys, with the pressures of that and 24 hours a day on duty?
It's interesting because some of you may have heard it, but Radio 4 did Palm Sunday service from our place last year, which created havoc with Radio 4, but we enjoyed it. And they asked my eldest son that question, and his answer I thought was very sensible. He says, "I've got nothing to compare with. It's always been like this." But I've made certain observations, like on the odd occasion that I wear a suit, I have got one, and I'll come in, and certain comments like, my youngest son, the first time I remember this, was coming in a suit, and he says, "All right, Dad, been in court again, have you?" And of course we've had lots of people in with, homeless, or trying to get detoxing off drugs, and husbands, wives, problems in marriages, stuff like that. And all sorts of people coming in, sometimes for a day or two, sometimes I think the longest is 2 years. But I think what struck me very forcibly was we had a guy called Mark from Manchester staying with us for a fortnight, and we couldn't tell anybody in Anfield while he was there, because he was reprogramming the social services, social security computer. But he was from a church in Manchester, and rather than commute, he said, could he stay with us? And the first night he was with us, our Gareth was sat there, and he was watching, and he often sort of sat in and listened in on conversations and things. But he waited for this Mark to go to bed, and then he come up to me and he said, hey Dad, what's his problem? And he got so used to the fact that people come in, had a problem, he was trying to suss out what this guy's problem was, and he couldn't work it out. But we have learned over the years, and I ought to explain something of the geography of the house because it makes a difference, is that if you can imagine, this is a big terraced house that was built in 1884. Downstairs is what we call open house. So everybody's in and out like they were at my mum's and my grandma's before that, and then, you know, the kettle's almost permanently on, and people come in, and our gang just go and make their own cup of tea because everybody sort of treats it in the same way as I used to my grandma's. And you go downstairs for a game of snooker. But once you get to the stairs, that is the territory of the folks living in the house. That's our territory. And if you go up, the first room up the stairs is the guest room, and that's where anybody who needs a roof over their head, they might be from Australia or Canada or from down the road. And there's a bathroom next to it. Oh, there's a toilet downstairs as well, so nobody needs to go upstairs. Then our lads' rooms, most of our bedrooms have got, we renovated it, not the time to tell you, but we did a Nehemiah, and the whole fellowship formed its own building company, so that we could do work on houses officially on grants, and then provide our labour for nothing, so that the corpy ended up paying for the whole thing, but it was perfectly legal. I had a lot of fun doing that. I remember the first time I hit my hand with a hammer, and they all waited to see what I was going to say and what tongue I was going to use, you know. But when we did all this renovation, we put wash basins in most of the rooms, so that you didn't have to queue up for the bathroom, which is an area of tension. And then each of the rooms, in more ways than one, and each of the rooms is like a bed sit, so that you can go in your own room and be on your own if you want. And then there's also a lounge upstairs, so that if the family want to be on their own away from everything else, there's that privacy. So we've learned the hard way over the years how to guard that within the situation. I just wonder whether Tina might say something about the lads and growing up and the education and that in it.
We've had a lot of criticism for bringing up our children in the area. I mean, off family and also off of the Christians, really. And it's something that I think we struggled with, and we decided that they were going to be educated in the local schools, and the family didn't like it. And not so much that the local Christians didn't actually criticise you, but they put you down. You'd go to various meetings or conferences, and you'd be sitting with people over meal times, you know, like we do here, and people would say, oh, well, we really admire what you're doing, we really like what you're doing, but we can't do it because we've got children. So you'd say, well, we've got children. To say, oh yes, but we couldn't expose our children to that. And our children's education is important. And the inference was always that our children weren't as good as their children, or that we didn't care about our children as much as they did. And sometimes it was quite hurtful, and you'd come away and you think, well, are we really doing the right thing? Are we really being fair to our children? But then we used to sort of believe, well, if God has called us here, He's called us as a family, and He's going to protect our children and hope, and their education shouldn't suffer. And I'm really pleased now. I mean, pleased as a mother, that they have achieved, but pleased too that I can turn around to other Christians and say, well, we've done it, because like, as David said, our eldest son's just got 4 A levels, he's in university, and our youngest son's just got 10 GCSEs, all grade A's and B's, and in the 6th form. So, I mean, I'm not saying that because I'm a proud parent, but I'm saying it as a sort of, well, it can be done.
And they're both Christians and preachers.
Right, we have to be very quick because we've actually run out of time.
Very quick. I've got fortunate myself. Statistics for the drop-off rate of faith in leaders in church people who are heavily involved in leadership is pretty disappointing. Up to 90%, some people say. What do you have to say as a blueprint, in your experience, of how to bring kids up so they don't turn away from faith, like many people who have done themselves.
Very quick answer.
Yeah. I think I would just simply say give your kids time. I was very aware when mine were younger of being busy taking street kids off on holidays and camps and stuff like that and neglecting my own kids. When you're under pressure, you tend to sacrifice your family's time because you think they'll understand. I now am firmly of the conviction that if you want to see your kids grow up in the faith, you've got to model something that they want to be a part of. And so even though there's a temptation there, give your kids and your partner time and value time, not just shoved in here and there, and make the effort. And if there's a sacrifice, don't make it on your family.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll have yes. We'll have opportunity later on to express our thanks more thoroughly to Dave and Tina, and I'm going to hand over now to Tony, who's going to lead us in the next part of our time together, which is sharing together in communion.